Morphology is destiny. The form and structure that is the morphology of the places where we live profoundly and directly affects our quality of life and our way of life. So many things. Where we can walk, how far we can walk, how much we need to drive, how socially connected we might be to our neighbors, how much we enjoy being in our neighborhood. These impact our health and well-being and our environment. With particular concern about health and the built environment, I started to think that we need to be doing things radically differently than how we are in terms of city building. We need a revolution. But if we're going to have that revolution, we need to understand evolution, how the city developed. Calgary is a very young city. It's gone from its pioneer beginnings in 1884 to maturity in a little over a century and a half. With no real physical constraints to its growth, the city has spread and spread and spread and spread. And most of that development in the last 50 years has been in the form of single-family suburbs, very car-dependent, and it's produced, for the city of about 1.2 million people, a pretty low-density place. So Calgary's been holding at about 5,000 people per square mile for about the last 50 years. And that's pretty low density for a city. It's not nearly the density that helps us support public transportation the way we should. And it makes it really hard to provide things like schools and swimming pools and libraries, things that all citizens should be able to access. And a lot of that development just seems to be in the service of the monster in our garage. And most of us would say that's not the kind of city we want. We want a different kind of city, a different kind of environment. So let's look at the evolution of the city from another point of view. In the work that we do in the Urban Lab, we study Calgary a lot, and we've found that it's a very easy city to visualize and to understand, because those neighborhoods have evolved in concentric circles around the downtown core over time. Calgary neighborhoods also have very distinct boundaries, and so it makes it possible for us in the Urban Lab to map and to analyze the neighborhood types. And we categorized all of those neighborhood types, all of those neighborhoods, really in terms of 3 basic types, with only about a dozen anomalies, and that's in about 230 neighborhoods. So we'll go through those neighborhood types, because there are a lot of differences in what those provide. Calgary evolved in terms of a grid for about the first 50 or so years of its evolution, up to about in the 1940s. The grid really makes a continuous urban fabric. You can get from one place to another really, really easily. And the street design during that time always included sidewalks on both sides, treed boulevards, and the canopies of those trees now form that kind of roof on top of the street, and we like to call that a really good urban room. The next phase in Calgary's development happened post-World War II. There was a booming population, there was a lot of prosperity, and the kind of neighborhood form that was developed then, it was neighborhoods that were built around an elementary school, typically, family-oriented, but also very car-oriented. So the street design was really good for traffic efficiency, not as good anymore for pedestrians. No treed boulevards, very rare, and sidewalks are right beside the street. The third phase is what we're into still from about the 1980s and now. This is the curvilinear type of neighborhood, characterized by wide collector roads, a kind of loops and lollipops block system. And the street design is pretty interesting. If you live in one of these neighborhoods, you're lucky if you have a sidewalk on even one side. Street trees are almost an impossibility because with no back lanes, garages and driveways need to be in the front, and so do the underground services. So there's very little opportunity to plant a tree. So this has a lot of impact on our lives. If you're like me and you have one of these wearable fitness trackers, you probably have a bit of an obsession with how many steps you can clock in a day. And that is impacted by neighborhood type. So we've looked at what we call walk sheds, which is the area that someone might have access to over a given amount of time, and it allows us to measure those walk sheds. The walk sheds of grid neighborhoods are almost twice the size of the walk sheds available in a curvilinear neighborhood, and the warp grid is somewhere in between. But it's not enough to have a large walk shed. What's the quality of that environment? So we've looked at the qualities of the built environment, and we've mapped and we color-coded it, and what you see on this graphic are the higher quality built environments with the darker colors. And what really surprised us about this exercise was that all we've been learning in the last decades and decades, our technology, our knowledge about city form, why is the quality of the built environment declining? Why are we still building roads that are too wide? Why is walkability and street trees, why are those compromises? And how does this environment really support a diverse population? Research has shown that, yes, we are all aging, and we were all children at one time. But those two segments of the population, the very young and the very old, need to be supported in the kind of built environment that we're creating. So if we can make a built environment that's best for those vulnerable populations, the very young and the very old, then we will be building a city that's resilient. So if how we've been building cities, according to the conventions, is just producing conventional cities, shouldn't we have a different kind of a framework, something that would help us to achieve what we want to? We've been working with this framework for over a decade now, and it's a way to try to understand the composition of the city and what should be emphasized. And it's based on the idea that we have a built environment with interrelated layers. Some are more permanent and some are less permanent. So we'll go through those. Land and environmental factors, those are the most permanent aspects of the built environment. Calgary is situated in the middle of some of the best agricultural land in the world and in some of the most breathtakingly gorgeous amenity land. I don't think we've lived up to that landscape yet. We also have a four-season environment, and we're definitely a winter city still. Design and planning really need to reflect those conditions. Good urbanism is also good environmentalism. On top of that landscape, then, sits what we call the public realm. And that's the network of streets, plazas, parks, and public spaces where we all spend a lot of our social lives and where we can really appreciate cultural meaning and we can have an opportunity for true civic engagement. If that public realm is integrated with the landscape, that can produce some of the most potent places in our city. The Calgary River Path system is one of those very potent places, and I think it rivals anywhere on Earth in terms of its ability to engage citizens and reflect the landscape. The next level in terms of permanence are the buildings, a built form. Many generations of buildings will come and go in the lifetime of a city. Calgary is on its first or second or third generation of buildings, but older cities like Rome and Jerusalem and so on have 12 or 15 generations of buildings that take place within that city evolution. Even though buildings are not as permanent as the public realm, they have a huge responsibility to shape it. So the edges of the buildings are so important in the quality of our urban life. Active edges, rather than places where we see just garage doors and blank walls, those produce better cities because the outside of the building is really the inside of the street. Within a building, you can have, if you do it right, a lot of different potential uses. So a building that's designed well, with resilience in mind, could adapt from being apartments to accommodate restaurants, stores, offices. And that makes for a lot of continuity in the city if we're not tearing down buildings when we don't need to. But a single-family residence has precisely one use, and it cannot be adapted to anything else. So on top of that pyramid is really the fun stuff. The stuff we see immediately, the colors, the decorations, the public art, the things that really give a sense of delight and enjoyment in our urban experience. But they're not permanent. They are very ephemeral. But we're spending sometimes more attention on these less permanent elements than we are on the most permanent. So the lesson from all of this that we've found in our work is that we believe that the landscape and the public realm should be the deepest infrastructure of the city and should be where we spend most of our design intention. So I'm going to leave you with a question and a challenge. The question is Calgary too conventional for its context? Calgary is regularly ranked by The Economist and other indexes as having really high livability. And we have the luck of the draw. We have oil and gas, we have cows, we have land, we have resources, we have the dynamic culture that is the envy of places around the world. But why does our city not look more advanced and more exciting in some ways than places that don't have those advantages? We all enjoy a great quality of life, but we have so many responsibilities with what we've been given. So the challenge is for all of us to be innovators in terms of city building. So in addition to being innovators in energy and oil and gas, we can also be leading the way in terms of built form and city making. Because the morphology that we can create with new ways of doing things can also create a better destiny for ourselves and for future generations. Thank you.